As we have just noted, there are several differences between the House and Senate plans that have to be reconciled before a bill can go to the president. I want to put up what maybe perhaps the two biggest that are creating the sharpest differences. In the Senate plan, most tax cuts for individuals, as we said, expire in 2026, and the Senate plan does not repeal the estate tax. House conservatives say that both of those are unacceptable. So how is that going to get worked out?
Well, first, Chris, thanks for having me. Let me take a step back to say a year ago, the American people voted for fundamental change in this country, and tax reform is a very big part of it. People wanting to keep more of their hard-earned money. And that's what you see in the bills that passed both the House and the Senate. Absolutely, there are some changes that still need to be made in conference to work these things out. The other thing that you haven't mentioned, the big differences are the Republican bill in the Senate eliminates the mandate of Obamacare. It takes Obamacare from being a mandatory program to a voluntary program. And yes, I like the idea of making taking away the death tax entirely. You know, the other thing that we're doing in terms of helping stimulate the economy, President Trump talks about energy dominance for America, and we allow more energy exploration in an area of Alaska that's been off limits for a long time. I hope those are included.
So briefly, I mean, there are some things that you're saying you like better in the Senate plan, some things you like better in the House plan, but you only passed it in the Senate with one vote to spare. So the question is this going to be a give and take where you'll take some of one and some of the other, or is the House basically going to have to swallow the Senate plan?
Well, there's going to be a conference committee. The members from the House and the Senate will get together to look for the best solutions, but we're not that far apart. Fundamentally, for the American public, we double the standard deductions, double the child tax credits. We lower the rates. And in terms of investing in America and in an American-first economy, we lower tax rates for Main Street businesses all across the country, as well as corporations, to make us much more competitive internationally. So investments are made in America and not overseas.
Well, let's talk about one of those investments. And President Trump, as Jennifer Griffin suggested, may have thrown a slight monkey wrench into things on Saturday morning. He suggested that instead of cutting the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%, that he might accept cutting it to 22%. A lot of hardline conservatives in the House say that is not acceptable. They want it down to 20%. They want it to 15%. Is that idea of a 22% corporate tax rate, is that on the table now?
We have 20% in both the House and the Senate. That's the number that I'd like to see. President Trump came to our policy lunch on Tuesday. I thought did a wonderful job explaining how important this is, because once we get tax reform done, and he is ready and willing to sign the tax relief for the American people, the tax reductions and tax cuts that people are desperately looking for to get the economy growing even faster, he said then we can go on to additional things, infrastructure,
Sir,
all the important things.
To answer my question, is 22% acceptable or not?
Well, everybody's going to have to decide for themselves how they would vote. My preference is 20%. I think we have a very good bill out of the Senate. The House has some components, but I think this is a major step forward for the American public. We're going to get this to the president's desk for his signature before the end of the year.
Let me ask you about a couple of questions that people are raising about this bill. One of the president and Republicans' key selling points was that these tax cuts would pay for themselves because they would spur so much economic growth. Here's Treasury Secretary Mnuchin.
In our models, we believe there will be $2.5 trillion of growth. And we're happy to go through the numbers. We're happy to give the details.
But even taking into account economic growth, what's called dynamic scoring, the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation came out with its analysis of the Senate plan this week. They say that even after growth, it still is going to add $1 trillion to the debt. Not pay for itself, add $1 trillion.
Well, two things. One is, the good news is this group that tends to be wildly pessimistic has actually said that there will be economic growth as a result of the things that we're proposing with this tax relief bill.
But not enough, sir.
They are wildly pessimistic. Economists across the board believe that we will do much, much better. Just take a look at the current economy. These are all based on 1.8 stagnant Obamacare numbers. We don't have to do much to get up to much higher numbers because the last 2 quarters, we've had over 3% economic growth in this country, and we've had 2 million new jobs already created since the day President Trump was elected, and a lot of that has to do with the reform of regulations. So when you do regulatory relief as well as tax relief, I think we are going to have an accelerated growth of the economy way beyond what people are predicting.
Another big selling point has been that the corporate tax cut will result in benefits, jobs, higher wages for the middle class. Here's President Trump.
We need a competitive tax code that creates more jobs and higher wages for Americans. It's time to give American workers the pay raise that they've been looking for many, many years.
But major companies like Cisco, like Pfizer, like Coca-Cola all say that they will turn over most of their tax savings not to workers but to shareholders in the form of bigger dividends and stock buybacks. That directly contradicts what the president said.
Well, when we take our tax rates, the corporate rates, from one of the highest in the world to now one of the lower tax rates in the world, we have a global economy. Money will come rushing into the United States to invest here. I expect to see incredible amounts of investment from around the world. We live in a global economy, even though the Joint Commission on Taxation really doesn't look at it that way when they do their evaluation and assessments.
I want to turn to a different subject, and that is, as you well know, the government runs out of money. On Friday, the working thought is that now that you'll pass a 2-week extension till the 22nd of December, just before Christmas, and try to work out issues then. Is that something that you'd accept, a 2-week extension to try to work things out? And also, what about Democrats and some Republicans who are now saying that to get a deal, a long-term spending deal, that you have to have a DACA fix to protect the so-called dreamers?
Well, I think we need to keep the government open. To me, that's what a mature, responsible governing group does. You're right, it does require bipartisan participation. I thought it was incredibly childish for Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi to not go to that White House meeting that they were scheduled to go to with President Trump. I thought it was irresponsible on their part, because we need to work together to keep the government open. I'd like to move that date into either January or February. We need to fund the government and do it competently.
And I've got less than a minute left for this question, sir. On DACA, as we said, some members of both parties are demanding a DACA fix as part of a long-term spending bill. This week we had the shocking verdict in the Steinle case, where the illegal immigrant who had been deported and returned several times was acquitted on charges of murder. I know he was not a dreamer, but does that, just in an emotional sense, make it harder to arrive at a DACA fix?
Well, you know, the Democrats have threatened to shut down the government over dealing with illegal immigrants, people that are in the country illegally. I think that's the wrong way to go, but we've had Democrats speak to that effect, and I think that that recent result in that case and that verdict points to the impact of that illegal immigration has had in our country to a detrimental effect.
Senator Barrasso, thank you. Thanks for your time, and we'll track all the developments in Congress this week.